convenience-oriented society, consumers have a lot of expectations for immediate satisfaction and gratification. And credit unions have a challenge in meeting those consumer needs. And a lot of them do it very well, but some have a challenge doing that. But all credit unions have a challenge at maintaining their philosophical roots and anchoring themselves on their member-owned cooperative status, while at the same time meeting those increasingly demanding needs of consumers, which involve a lot of technology most of the time. And here to talk to us about that and how to balance those two things is Bret Weekes, president of eDoc Innovations, based in Middlebury, Vermont. eDoc, and I got to read this because I'm not going to get the words right. eDoc is an e-commerce software development company specializing in mobile enterprise digital transaction management. It serves small to mid-sized financial institutions, universities, insurance agencies, and other businesses throughout the country. And eDoc is one of our association's preferred business partners, and we're real fortunate to have Bret here with us today to share his expertise and his insights with us. So Bret,
thank you, Joe.
Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Great.
Yeah, very happy to be here. That was quite a mouthful, digital transaction management.
It is. You're accustomed to it, but I'm not. But so I'm glad you get to say it way more often than I do.
You bet. You bet. Well, we're delighted to be here. eDoc Innovations is, as you said, is a CUSO. Actually, we're a credit union-owned service organization, and the cooperative principles that you talk about in having that basis when we're talking about technology and how do we meet the needs of members and staying true to the roots of cooperative services is a real challenge. So I'm delighted to be here to talk about that today.
That's great.
So where should we begin? Credit unions, cooperatives.
Well, credit unions are rooted in cooperative principles, right?
They are.
And I saw that you wrote an article recently about, it wasn't cooperative specifically, but about cooperative principles. And I thought that was intriguing that someone from a technology company such as yours ended up writing this article, and I forget exactly where I saw it, but maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah.
How do you end up doing that when you work for a tech company?
Absolutely. Well, my story is kind of an interesting story. The article you're talking about was published in CU Insight, and it was based on cooperative principles and how do credit unions stay true to the cooperative principles that they have while meeting the needs of a very changing landscape with member expectations and their consumer behavior. In that article, I talk a little bit about the fundamental cooperative principles, particularly that of community, and the changing landscape that credit unions are facing today when we consider the communities that they service. We look historically at communities that credit unions have served, and we see a geographical community that's bound by neighborhoods and employers and religious organizations, and these communities credit unions serviced and have done for decades. Today, it's an interesting change that's happening in our society with the mobile economy that's happening all around us. In the article, I talk a little bit about the study that the Federal Reserve Bank did in 2016. 87% of the U.S. adults own cell phones today. And when we dig a little bit deeper, adults 18 to 44, that age bracket, 91%.
Wow.
So we start thinking about, well, what is the impact of that? A very high percentage, 77% of that 91% have smartphones.
Yeah.
So now the smartphone technology and what it's capable of doing is changing the landscape of the community that we have served for many, many years. And so talking about how do we reach to a new virtual community, stay true to the cooperative principle of helping individuals become fiscally self-reliant through the credit union and the cooperative principles and the value of that cooperative charter, while adopting and addressing the needs of that member, which is very different than the traditional member that would come into the branch, and we would see them every day. We knew their face, and there was a very face-to-face relationship with. Now our member communities are virtual. Not very often do we see their face except in the virtual footprint that they're doing transactions. That's a very different kind of landscape for credit unions. I think it's really challenging industry leaders to say, how do we stay true to the cooperative principles that we have and still serve a new kind of community, this virtual community?
Right, right. Well, yeah, so you're exactly right. You know, you have, and I've seen it for all of the years that I've worked with credit unions, and no doubt you have too, that, you know, it's partly technology, partly as any institution grows and grows and grows, larger and larger, becomes more challenging to maintain that direct connection with an individual, and it takes a special expertise and special talent, and a special way of doing business to keep members, the increasing number of them, feeling that close-knit tie to your financial institution.
Yeah, and what you've said there about the way you do business, I think, is really key. And one of the keys of why eDoc Innovations is actually in business today is to help credit unions do business in a certain kind of a way. eDoc is a CUSO, which means that we're owned by credit unions, and the value of CUSOs in helping credit unions is tremendous. It's vast. So the CUSO is a vehicle to allow credit unions to take products and services, technologies that they need or want to service members, and aggregate the costs associated with that and distribute it across multiple credit unions. And in that way, we drive down the cost of whatever those products and services are and serve the members in that specific niche. When you do that, when you're engaged in that kind of a business enterprise, how you do business is really key. As a technology company leader, the cooperative principles of credit unions drive how our business works. Although we're a for-profit organization owned by credit unions, that's the value and the vehicle that credit unions have. Those cooperative principles permeate inside our organization. We know why we're in business. That's to help the member. And sometimes I even ask credit union leaders, how do you protect the capital that your members entrust to you? I'm a member of Vermont Federal Credit Union here locally, and you know, as I look at that and I talk to business leaders all across the country, you know, and I ask them that question, how do you do that? A lot of the responses are varied. Well, we have these products and services that we offer them. We have this expertise. We've got these locations to service them, and all of those are good answers. But I think one of the answers that's really valuable is we defend the investments that we make, particularly technology investments, by participating in the ownership and the development of the technology. That's how we defend those investments. Technology investments typically are very expensive, or can be one of the most expensive investments that credit unions will make. And I just really love it when I have an industry leader who says, we participate in CUSOs because that's how we defend the capital that we invest in technology.
Interesting.
And that's what we do every day, is we build technology. And I love to drive around communities all across the country, and in communities that I know their credit unions are using our services to help service their members. Our world's a little bit different today at eDoc because we deal with virtual communities.
Right.
And that's not a place that you drive through, but it is a place that we consider and say, how does the experience of the member in that virtual community going to be when they use a solution that's built by eDoc? So
if I might shift the conversation just slightly, you know, declining number of financial institutions, including credit unions, and a lot of different kinds of businesses, but financial institutions for our discussion purposes. And the ones that do business with eDoc, your company, probably have a little bit more, I assume, because they do business with eDoc already, they probably have a little bit more interest, aptitude, whatever, or marriage to you know, that mobile approach of dealing with members, whether it be e-signatures or mobile banking or, you know, whatever it might be. But when you step back from your experience and look at the whole credit union industry, for example, if we're just zeroing on credit unions, you know, what do you think is the acceptability of credit unions these days overall as an industry, not just the ones that deal with eDoc, for meeting that member desire to have the latest and greatest ability to conduct your relationship with your financial institution on a smartphone, to sign your mortgage documents online, and all those kinds of things, because that's a big shift for those conservative credit unions that grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, of doing it all with lots of stacks of paper and binders and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. As we think about the industry as a whole and say, where are we at in our evolution of being able to address the needs of the mobile community and that part of our membership, I think we can look to some data, some statistics that are available in the industry. We did a research recently, a research project with 256 credit unions to assess where were they at in their mobile strategy. How are we addressing mobile members today? We learned some interesting things. About 47% of those credit unions had put into place some kind of digital transaction process, either through mobile banking, internet banking, or a virtual device capable technology to reach to the virtual community to do the transactions. The Federal Reserve Bank reported that 44% of the people that own cell phones have a bank account, and said that they would either do a transaction or had done a transaction in the next 12 or last 12 months. So within a 24-month period, 44% of the consumers said they had access to some kind of virtual or mobile capability to do a financial transaction, and that they had or would do it. So I think that gives us some perspective a little bit globally as an industry to say there's about 40% of our industry, maybe 45% of our industry, that has started the shift and is making the move to address the needs of the virtual community that they have in their membership. Some of those, I would say, in my experience, this is just my experience here, this is not tangible data, probably half of those, so somewhere in the 25 percentile, I would say, are credit unions that have a very proactive outlook for that mobile community and are not only trying to reach the needs of their current membership in that community, but are also trying to acquire new members who have that kind of community expectation. As you and I think about this, we associate it with technology and credit unions all the time. That might be a stark realization to recognize that less than half of the industry is still struggling to figure out how to get the reach of the mobile member.
Right. Being in Vermont, we're awful close to the Canadian border. Well, we're on the Canadian border. And I don't know if this is a fair question of you, because I don't know how cognizant you are of what goes on with financial services north of the border here. But I'm just wondering if you have any insights or any knowledge about how financial services and mobile delivery and acceptance and all that kind of stuff differs just a little bit north of us in Canada compared to here. Is that something you've run across at all?
So again, these are not hard statistics,
Sure.
but in the Canadian credit union market, we have some strong aggregation in what we would term as QSOs,
Right.
with the back-end services and technology services with credit unions and Desjardins. That community really, I think, has a very good grasp and is very proactive in delivering to a virtual community financial services. The model is, because they've been doing it for a long time, and aggregating those costs, is allowing institutions to have access to technology. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have here in Vermont and other places in the U.S. is credit unions knowing where do I have access to, and then tapping into resources that will let them get technology that may be out of the reach with just on their own, but that could come through a QSO
Right.
and get technology in their hands, get it in the hands of their members, and start working with the virtual communities. I think that as a whole, my estimation would be very similar in its adoption. The United States is a little bit behind the rest of the world as far as the adoption
Right.
of mobile technology. So I would expect to see somewhere closer to 60 instead of down in the 45 range, probably, based on where we're at.
Well, that's a pretty substantial difference, you know,
Yeah.
when you're looking at across the whole population. So, I've always felt that, you know, based on articles you read and, you know, limited travel and whatnot, that, as you said, that United States financial services, not just credit unions, kind of lags behind technology-wise from a consumer perspective. You know, other parts of the world, not all, but some, like Canada and Europe in particular.
Yeah, specifically in some segments. I think we're ahead in some segments of that, and we're behind in others. Depends on what niche of technology we're really trying to address or considering. But we have work to do. Yeah.
For sure. So getting back to the cooperative principles that you were touching on, so how do you see some of your client credit unions that use eDoc innovations, you know, adhering to their, or not losing sight of their cooperative roots and cooperative principles while they're still, you know, delving deep headlong into, you know, mobile banking and internet banking and all those kinds of things for their members?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that we're seeing credit unions who are really devoted to their members and to the changing landscape of that membership, actually they're the ones diving in and getting into the mobile community. They're adopting mobile banking. They're adopting digital transaction processing. You know, they're adapting to the needs and behaviors of members in that community very proactively. Callahan had an interesting statistic. They reported as a year-over-year growth pattern. They did a survey and analysis on credit unions that were under 100 million in assets. Credit unions under 100 million assets who had adopted mobile banking, mobile deposit, digital transaction processing, or any one of those services, trended membership growth about 3.97%, almost 4%. Their peers who hadn't had negative member growth. Now, I think that's something very interesting. These are small credit unions that we might say, you know, a lot of people might dismiss and say, oh, you're too small, you can't have that kind of technology. But they figured out a way to balance and make that transition. They've got branches, they know it's expensive, they're still doing face-to-face transactions, but they are reaching to their virtual members and they're acquiring new virtual members through that process, and their community, that cooperative community, is being extended into the new landscape.
Well, I think that's great that, you know, a prime example of don't dismiss, you know, a credit union based on, or any financial institution based on size alone. It's, you know, what they do and how they do it. Because there are those niches out there, or even if not a niche, those credit unions that, like you say, are, you know, not looking at technology as an insurmountable challenge, but as an opportunity to do something for or with their members that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's unfortunate that we have had a culture over the last decade that is a reduction culture. Regulatory influence certainly playing a big part of that. But I don't think in a lot of cases that consolidation is actually a solution that has to be. I think that credit unions, it's more about how do we help them visualize and start to see a pathway to reach to that mobile member and that mobile community through products and services that are available through QSOs across the country. eDoc's not the only QSO that provides technology services. The costs associated with it are disruptive. We see that in our space. Contrast us to, you know, a competitive product, we see drastic differences because of the business philosophy. We're not worried about quarterly earnings and prep for IPO and all those kinds of things. You know, this is about, we need to be profitable, but our profitability is driven by the vision and the cooperative principle that we're helping the member, and we just can't lose sight of that. And I think that's You know, that's one of the messages that I would love to advocate, and I do advocate, you know, every time I visit with credit union leaders, because I think it's really key.
That's a great philosophy to have. Our time is winding down, unfortunately. Are there any things we haven't touched on that we should before we close this segment out?
You know, we've talked about some great things, and I appreciate your time. The association, I think, has a role that's valuable in the industry, both here in Vermont and across the country, and the collaboration between cooperatives, I think, is, you know, something that's important. Digital transactions and the kinds of expertise that we provide and offer at eDoc Innovations are in their infancy of adoption. We look to see more and more of that as we go forward. We want to make sure that we're compliant, that we're the safe standard for credit unions, and I think that's one thing that I would just say as we close is some credit unions feel like being mobile means that I have exposure that I don't have today, or maybe that I don't want. And I would encourage credit unions to look beyond that fear, because that fear and what you can do will paralyze you in your growth. And it's not something that you can't overcome and that you can't address. And that's what we do, is help credit unions address that. Safeguard the digital transaction, get into the mobile community, address that mobile member, but do it in a safe, compliant way.
Well, the Association of Vermont Credit Unions is proud to have a favored business relationship with eDoc Innovations and you, Bret. And one thing I forgot to ask, for people that are watching, if they want to learn more about eDoc Innovations or contact you directly to, you know, continue the discussion, how do they reach you or find out more about what eDoc does?
Absolutely. So they can go to eDoc Innovations website, which is edoclogic.com. And there, I've got my email address,
right,
my phone number on the website. Feel free to email me, call me. My door is always open.
Great. Well, thanks very much for spending time with us, Bret. We all greatly appreciate it. It's been very insightful having this discussion with you. All of our video recordings are this one and all the others that we've done in the past and we'll do in the future are on the Vermont Credit Unions channel on YouTube. So just go to youtube.com and do a search on Vermont Credit Unions with an S, and you'll see all of this recording and all the others that we've done. Thank you very much. This has been Joe Bergeron and
Bret Weekes.
so long for now.
So long. Thanks, Joe.